The first time I saw the Little Havana flood, it was just past 7:30 in the morning, and the water was still running in the gutters. It had rained all night, one of those heavy, steady Miami downpours that doesn't leave anything alone. The street was closed, orange cones and a sawhorse blocking off the intersection. A few guys in reflective vests stood around a coffee cart, about something. Up the block, brown water lapped at the doorsteps of a row of shops, turning the sidewalk into a long, shallow pond. I'd been called in to look at a failed pump. It was the kind of job I did all the time. A gas meter, a camera on a reel, a rope, and a short report. The county needed someone to sign off on the reason, something they could file and forget. They'd sent Dale Warner to meet me. He was waiting by a white department truck with the doors open, a big man in a county logo polo and khakis, sipping from a foam cup. He looked like he'd been up for hours. "Leroy," he said, not offering his hand. "We're on the clock. Pump's down, probably just a burned motor. Should be a quick in and out." He led me toward the culvert entrance, a concrete mouth set low in the embankment beside the road. The rain had stopped, but water still trickled down from the street above, tracing shiny paths over the gray concrete. I put a glove on and laid my palm flat against the wall. It was warm. Not sun-warm, but a deep, damp heat, like skin. I looked closer. At shoulder height, there were 3 wet fingerprints pressed into the concrete, the ridges clear. They weren't smudged or fading. They looked fresh, as if someone had just pushed their hand against the wall from the inside. "Graffiti kids," Dale said from behind me. He hadn't moved. "They get in with spray paint, leave a mess. Nothing to do with the pump. Document the motor, write it up. Don't go inventing a second problem." I didn't answer. I just picked up my tool case and ducked inside. The tunnel was low, a concrete channel maybe waist high. You had to crouch. Dale stayed at the entrance, handing me a coiled rope. "Clip it to your vest. Standard procedure." He explained the situation as we moved past sandbags and a portable generator that chugged oily smoke into the damp air. "Local businesses can't stay closed. Commissioners touring the neighborhood by noon. We need a safe explanation before then. Burned motor, debris blockage. Something simple." I checked my gas monitor. The numbers were fine. Normal oxygen, no sewer gases. But the air had a smell underneath the wet concrete and diesel, something like wet pennies and boiled cabbage. Faint, but there. "Department doesn't have a budget for exploratory work," Dale said, his voice echoing. "You find something that's not in the scope, it becomes your liability. Understood?" I nodded, signed my name on the clipboard he held out, and clipped the radio to my vest. The static hissed softly. "Who was down here last?" I asked. "A crew," he said, and that was all. I started crawling. The rope played out behind me, a thin tether to the gray rectangle of daylight. The tunnel should have been full of rushing water, but the floor was dry. Completely dry, except for a narrow, glistening strip that ran along the base of the left wall. It looked like wet ribbon, maybe an inch wide. I stopped and poked it with the tip of my probe. The strip quivered. Then it pulled itself together, shrinking from a band into a hair-thin line in the space of a second, like a vein deciding to hide. My camera was already running. I held it over the spot. On the monitor, the image dissolved into rolling static for a good 5 seconds before clearing up, showing nothing but dry concrete. I keyed the radio. "Dale, the tunnel's not behaving. There's no water, and something moved." His voice crackled back. "Stop wasting time. Get to the motor. That's what you're paid for." I kept going, dragging the tool case over cracked concrete. The pump chamber was a wider space where the tunnel opened up just enough to stand. The motor was there, housed in a metal casing. It was intact. The electrical panel beside it was dry, no sign of scorching or short. The failure wasn't here. I found it at the back wall. 3 thick black cables ran through a ragged hole cut into the concrete, a hole that wasn't on any of the plans I'd seen. The rubber insulation was swollen, warm to the touch. and beneath it, something pulsed. A slow, regular beat that made the cables twitch like tendons. I took pictures. The flash bounced off the glossy black rubber. I used my screwdriver to scrape at a translucent film clinging to the conduit. The film shrank back, contracting around the metal, and when I pulled the screwdriver away, it left a faint red stain on my glove.
"Leave the cables alone,"
Dale's voice ordered through the radio.
"Replace the panel and come out."
"I can't certify an electrical failure I haven't found," I said.
"Just do it."
I didn't. I traced the cables instead. They led into a side passage, narrow and dark, that ended at a steel door. It was an old maintenance door, painted over so many times the original county seal was just a bump beneath the layers. There was no handle on this side. A heavy chain had been welded across it from the other side, sealing it shut. I swept my headlamp over the threshold. Slow, dark beads of moisture were welling up from underneath the door, leaking out onto the concrete. Then 3 knocks sounded from the other side of the steel. Solid, heavy knocks.
"Dale,"
I said into the radio.
"did you put anyone in an adjoining chamber?" "There is no adjoining chamber."
His voice came back, flat and final. Another knock. Then a voice, coming right through the metal, clear as day. It was Dale's voice, his exact tone, but it said my name. Leroy. I backed up. The door bulged inward once with a low metallic groan, as if something very heavy had leaned against it from the other side. I got back to the pump chamber, my heart beating hard against my ribs. My hands were steady, which was something. I checked the recording on my radio. The device had a buffer, a few seconds of audio it held before you transmitted. I played it back. It was a burst of sound from about 10 seconds earlier. My own voice, but I hadn't spoken the words. It said, "Dale, open the door. I'm hurt." I stared at the little screen. The gas monitor still read normal, but the temperature display had climbed 6 degrees since I'd entered.
"Leroy, come out now."
Dale's voice was live in my ear.
"Say that again,"
I said.
"Get out of the tunnel. This isn't a discussion."
I listened to the live command, then to the recording. The pitch, the pauses, they were identical.
"My radio's picking up something,"
I said.
"It's defective. Get out here or I'm ending the contract."
I saved the audio file to my camera's memory. I took the orange spray paint from my case and marked the cable junction with a bright X on the wall. Then I got out, crawling back toward the daylight, the rope trailing behind me. I moved fast, before the tunnel could decide to use my voice again. Outside, the air felt cool and thin. Dale was by the truck, talking on his phone. He hung up when he saw me. I showed him the pictures on the camera screen, the swollen cables, the hole in the wall. I played him the audio file. He listened, his face tightening. Then he saw the smudge of orange paint on my glove. His irritation vanished, replaced by something else. A raw, naked fear. "You marked it," he said, his voice low. "It's evidence." He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "We've had 6 pump failures in Little Havana in 20 years, always after a rain like this. 2 contracted workers disappeared during inspections. The reports call them trespassing incidents." He looked away, toward the flooded street. "My younger brother, Don, he vanished near a drainage project 3 years ago. I'm not saying it's connected." "I need the original plans," I said. "They're archived downtown. Useless. The only useful thing is a report I can sign before the commissioner gets here." A county sedan pulled up then, and a woman got out. She had dark curls pinned back and carried a stack of rolled maps under one arm. She walked straight over. "Dale, you shouldn't have mentioned the old failures," she said, her voice dry and measured. She turned to me. "Leroy, I'm Linda Calderon. Hydrology." She handed me a photocopy. It showed a cross-section of the ground beneath us. Beneath the modern concrete culvert, there was an older brick channel sealed off in 1978. The report line read, "Organic obstruction. Every repair since then added cables, feeder pipes, all leading to the same location, she said. "I've tracked tissue samples from 3 different sites. Salt, oil, human keratin. The samples were destroyed before anyone could publish." She met my eyes. "The city calls it infrastructure because it can't admit it's maintaining something alive." Dale stepped between us. "That's enough. You're done here." Linda ignored him. She pressed a key into my hand. "Find out what they've been feeding." Dale snatched the key from my palm. "A private contractor doesn't get to investigate classified public works. The commissioner's office will handle it." He was on his phone again, his voice rising.
Yeah. Redirect the concrete crew. Fill the side passage and encase the whole pump chamber.
"Sealing an unexplained pressure source could rupture the road," I said. "The order comes from above me." Linda leaned closer to me, her voice almost a whisper. "Above him means people who have never set foot in a tunnel." I took a picture of her map with my phone while Dale argued with the crew foreman. When he finally hung up and climbed into the department truck, he didn't look back. The truck pulled away, spraying water from the puddles. I was alone by the culvert entrance. I looked at the concrete wall where I'd first seen the warm patch, the fingerprints. My orange X glowed under the overcast sky. Then it blinked, just once. A faint, quick pulse of light, as if the wall had noticed I was still there. The ladder went down into the dark. It was an old iron service ladder, bolted to the concrete wall of the shaft, and the rungs were slick with something that wasn't water. It felt like grease, or maybe something that had dried and been wetted again 100 times. I went down slow, my tool bag slung across my back, the 3 black feeder cables pressed against my shoulder by the narrowness of the shaft. They pulsed, a steady, slow beat, like a heart buried deep in the stone. The bottom opened up. My headlamp swept across a space so big the beam didn't reach the far end. The air was warm and thick, smelling of wet pennies and that boiled cabbage stink, only stronger now, mixed with the damp earth smell of a root cellar. I was standing in a chamber under the neighborhood. The walls weren't concrete anymore. They were old brick, arches that curved up into a ceiling of pale, glistening membrane. Veins, or roots, ran through the brick in thick, bundled masses, pulsing with a faint blue light. In the center of the chamber, a mound of darker tissue rose from a pool of black water, rising and falling like something breathing in its sleep. I swung the light up. Above the mound, through cracks in the membrane, I could see the bottoms of buildings. Concrete foundations, sewer lines, utility conduits, all disappearing into the growth like tree roots into soil. The city's guts fed into this thing. Then my beam caught the wall to my left. Dozens of pale, oval forms were embedded in the brick, each about the size of a person, covered in a thin, translucent film. They were arranged in rows, like pods. One of them moved. A hand, fingers curling slowly inward, then relaxing. I froze. The lamp held steady on that spot. The city's infrastructure. It hadn't just grown around pipes and wires. I walked over, my boots sinking slightly into the soft, wet floor. The nearest oval was at chest height. I wiped the slick mucus from its surface with the back of my glove. A man's face appeared underneath. Eyes closed, mouth open in a silent O, as if he'd been caught speaking underwater. He was wearing a decayed municipal work shirt. A department badge was fused into the fabric, the plastic warped but the name still legible. Don Warner. I fumbled my camera out, my hand steady but cold. I took a picture of the badge, then the face. The flash bounced off the membrane, and for a second his features were stark and clear. I moved to the next pod. Another man, older, in work clothes that looked decades out of date. Then another. Some were just shapes now, but others were recent. All of them had thin, cord-like tendrils entering their mouths, their ears, the tips of their fingers. Don's eyes opened. They didn't blink. They just opened, milky and unfocused, staring past me at the ceiling of membrane. His chest didn't move. He wasn't breathing, but his lips twitched, forming words without sound. I leaned closer. "It keeps the water down," his voice said. It didn't come from his mouth. It came from the walls, from the air. A wet, echoing whisper that layered over itself. "Who put you here?" I asked, my own voice too loud in the stillness. His fingers twitched, a slow, agonized motion, pointing toward the feeder cables that ran from the ceiling into the central mound. The membrane around his neck tightened, squeezing like a fist, and his mouth clamped shut. The cords at his temples throbbed. I cut one. Just one. A thin cord attached to his cheek, with the blade of my multi-tool. It came away with a soft, tearing sound, and a clear fluid welled up from the stub. His face surfaced again, his eyes locking onto mine. This time his voice was clearer, but it wasn't just his. It was layered with other voices, men's voices, some young, some old, all speaking the same words in unison. "After the hurricane," the chorus said. "It came into the brick. It ate the sewage, the oil, the flood. The engineers saw. The neighborhoods connected stayed dry. They sent crews to repair. Then they stopped recording the ones who stayed." "Why did Dale keep sending people?" I asked. "Because people above survive," the voices answered. The words hung there. They turned Dale from a guy obstructing a report into something else. A participant. Maybe not a willing one, but a participant all the same. The central mound shuddered. A deep, wet contraction that made the whole chamber tremble. Every feeder cable lit up at once, glowing a harsh, electric blue. And then Dale's voice filled the space, calm and close, right next to my ear. "Leroy, step away from my brother." I grabbed the radio on my vest. It was switched off. The voice wasn't coming through the speaker. The membrane of the mound rippled, forming a wet, three-dimensional outline of a face. Dale's face. Then shoulders, arms, a hollow in the tissue that looked like a man leaning against a wall. "The city sent you," the imitation said in Dale's exact tone, "because an outsider can enter without recognizing the arrangement." "You're not here," I said. The imitation smiled, a slow, terrible stretching of the membrane. "I have been here many times." On the wall, Don's body strained against his pod, a silent scream twisting his features. The black water around my boots began to rise, not from any new source, but as if the pool itself was swelling. The organism had stopped just watching me. It was testing now, seeing what a familiar human voice could make me do. I climbed onto the central mound. The tissue was hot, almost burning through the sole of my boot. I knelt, ignoring the heat, and brushed away a layer of slime near the base of the cable junction. Underneath, set into the old brick, was a manual gate wheel, crusted with rust and growth. Elena's map flashed in my mind. The pressure could be vented toward the main culvert, if I severed the feeder network first. Thin, whip-like tendrils shot out from the mound, wrapping around my legs. They tightened, pulling me down. Dale's voice came again, not from the air this time, but from the tendrils themselves, vibrating against my calves. "Restore the cables." It wasn't invulnerable. It needed the department's electricity, its waste lines. It was plugged into the city, and the city was feeding it. I cut the first feeder cable. My tool blade sawed through the swollen black rubber, and a spray of clear, oily fluid hit my visor. The chamber convulsed. A shudder ran through the brick walls, and every single body in the pods opened its mouth at once, a silent, collective gasp. My backup radio crackled to life in my ear, a different frequency, scratchy with interference.
"Leroy, it's Elena. County just approved concrete injection. Immediate. Can you hear me?"
I could hear the chamber shaking through my own transmission.
"I hear you. Leave the feeder system intact. The crew is on its way. Just leave it and get out."
"Do they know about Don?" I asked, watching the man's still face.
"They know enough."
She said, her voice tight.
A full disclosure exposes illegal dumping, missing workers, years of false reports.
Another voice broke into the transmission, harsh and familiar. Dale.
That organism is the only thing keeping stormwater from backing into 300 homes. You open that gate, you drown little Havana.
Did you sacrifice your brother? I asked. The line hissed. Then his answer, stripped bare.
I kept him from drowning.
The connection died in a burst of static as black water erupted from a crack in the floor. A geyser of oily foam and shredded tissue hit me in the chest, knocking me back against the cable housing. My headlamp shattered against the metal, plunging me into near darkness. The only light now was the faint, sickly blue pulse coming from beneath the membrane. Water was pouring in through the severed feeder junction, rising fast. It was at my knees, then my waist. The organism pulled me toward the mound with thick cords that lashed around my harness. I cut one, then another. A third wrapped around my throat, not tight enough to choke, but tight enough to hold. And then it spoke. It was my mother's voice. The exact way she sounded the night my father left. Tired and sad, and trying not to show it. Don't go, mijo. Please don't leave. I nearly dropped the knife. The words were a direct pull on a memory so private, so mine, that this thing under the city couldn't possibly have learned it. It was guessing, using a shape it thought would work. I tore my hand free and sliced through the cord. It fell away, dissolving into the water. I lunged for the manual wheel. Above me, the concrete ceiling groaned, and a long crack appeared along the line of an old brick arch. The chamber was coming apart, but the pressure had nowhere to go yet. Don's membrane split, a ragged tear from his shoulder to his waist, exposing the cords woven through his ribs, pale as worms. His eyes found me. "Turn it," he whispered, the sound barely carrying. Counterclockwise. The organism surged across the mound, a wave of living tissue, and dragged him deeper into the wall. I reached for him, my hand closing around air, knowing the camera in my bag could never capture what I was seeing. What this felt like. He caught my wrist. His grip was cold and weak, but it held. "Take the proof," he said, each word an effort. "Don't make me useful again." With his other hand, he grabbed the cords feeding into his chest and pulled. They came loose with a sound like wet Velcro tearing. The sudden release sent a shock through the network. A whole section of feeder cables went dark. The gate wheel shifted under my hand, the rust breaking free. Don's body went limp. He sank into the black water, the cords trailing behind him like seaweed. The chamber screamed. Not a sound of metal or stone, but a chorus of human voices, every missing worker, shouting in terror and release all at once. I left him there. Rescue had become impossible the moment I'd wiped the mucus from his face. I began turning the wheel. It moved in grinding quarter-inch jerks. A light appeared at the top of the shaft. Dale came down the ladder fast, a respirator over his face, a department bolt gun in his hands. He ignored the water, ignored the shaking walls, and jumped the last few feet, landing heavily between me and the gate. "Stop," he said, raising the gun. It wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at the wheel. "They're pouring concrete above us. You open that, we get buried alive." I pointed to Don's empty, torn membrane. "You fed it." He didn't deny it. His eyes were wide behind the respirator lens, darting around the chamber. He volunteered after the first collapse. The others were necessary losses. The organism formed a shape behind him. A man, translucent, with Don's features. It reached a hand toward Dale's shoulder. Dale flinched, turning halfway, and in that second of hesitation, I turned the wheel another quarter turn. He swung the bolt gun toward my chest and fired. The cable wrapped around my shoulder jerked me sideways. The bolt tore through muscle instead of bone, a hot, stunning pain that dropped me to one knee. The water was at my chest now. Dale shouted, his voice raw, but the organism was controlling the feeder lines around him, pulling him backward toward the heaving mound, while still using his stolen voice to yell at me. "The crew is here! They will seal it!" I crawled to the gate, the bolt gun strap torn loose and wrapped tight around my upper arm as a makeshift tourniquet. The water reached my neck. I looked up and saw the ceiling split wide open along the old brick arch. I understood then. The city's concrete wouldn't reinforce the chamber. It would seal the pressure inside the neighborhood. A permanent tomb. I kept turning. The manual wheel hit its stop with a final metallic clang. A deep, tearing crack raced through the brick channel behind the mound. Then the wall of black water came. It wasn't a wave. It was the entire pool moving at once. A tidal surge that tore across the chamber toward the old culvert passage. The central mound unfolded, the tissue peeling back into a circular mouth lined with rows of small, pale human teeth. It caught Dale around the torso as he tried to climb. He fired the bolt gun again, blind, the shot striking a cable and severing it in a shower of sparks. He looked at me, his face calm for the first time. "Tell them it kept the water down," he said. Then the mouth closed over him, and the mound sealed itself shut. I grabbed the rope I'd tied to the ladder and let the surge take me. It threw me through the steel doorway like a doll, into the roaring chaos of the main culvert. My respirator tore away. Dirty, oily water filled my mouth, my nose. I held the rope and pulled, hand over hand, while the tunnel walls flexed and groaned around me. Voices called from every direction. Dale's voice promising a dry route. Don's voice saying, "Turn left." Other voices, strangers' voices, all begging for help. I didn't answer. I just crawled toward the gray rectangle of light, my injured shoulder screaming every time it brushed against a protruding cable. Once it snagged, and I hung there, the current trying to drag me back. I cut the cable with my knife and kept going. I spilled out onto the flooded street just as the culvert entrance collapsed behind me in a roar of concrete and mud. I lay on the pavement, gasping, the world spinning. Brown water gushed from several storm grates up and down Southwest 8th Street, carrying with it chunks of brick, rainbow slicks of oil, and pale, fleshy strips of something that dissolved in the sunlight. Cars stalled. Water poured into storefronts. People climbed onto stoops, shouting. Emergency vehicles lit up the block, sirens wailing. I pushed myself up onto my elbows. My shirt was soaked through with blood and water. Elena was there, kneeling beside me, her hands on my shoulders. "Leroy, the card." I opened my clenched fist. The memory card was there, a tiny black rectangle in my palm. She took it. "Where's Dale?" she asked. "He stayed below," I said. By the time the paramedics got to me, cutting away my shirt to look at the bolt wound, the first official statement was already playing on a news van's monitor. A county spokesperson stood in front of a map, calling it a failed flood control gate, blaming the damage on unauthorized entry. The explanation was clean, simple, and broadcast live while they stitched my shoulder in the back of an ambulance. The neighborhood the organism had quietly protected for decades was suddenly, violently exposed to all the water it had been swallowing. That night at the temporary command post set up in a parking lot, county attorneys in suits took my camera and the original memory card. They put them in a plastic evidence bag and sealed it. Elena argued, her voice rising. She said the files documented missing workers, illegal connections. "The material is contaminated," one attorney said, his tone final. "It cannot be released." I learned Dale was officially listed as missing during an unauthorized inspection. Don's name didn't appear in any current employee record. The department issued a new statement, calling the old brick passage an abandoned utility cavity. I sat on a folding chair in a hospital corridor, my shoulder bandaged, and watched the statement play on a wall-mounted TV. Elena walked past the attending nurse and slipped a different memory card into my good hand. A duplicate. She didn't say anything. She just met my eyes for a second, then walked away. The institution had accepted my help in containing the disaster, and it had rejected, completely and finally, my account of what had caused it. The aluminum frame of the hospital cot squeaked under me when I shifted my weight. My shoulder was a dull, hot ache under the bandage, wrapped tight enough to make my fingers feel thick. I'd been sitting in that chair in the corridor since they'd stitched me up, watching the news on the wall-mounted TV go from live footage to official statements. A county spokesperson stood in front of a map of Little Havana, calling it a failed flood control gate, blaming the damage on unauthorized entry. I watched it on a loop. Morning came. The fluorescent lights in the ceiling buzzed like trapped flies. A nurse brought me a cup of lukewarm coffee in a paper cup, and I held it in my good hand, watching the steam rise and vanish. Elena found me just after 9. She didn't look like she'd slept. Her dark curls were pulled back tight, and she had her county ID badge clipped to the collar of her blouse. She pulled a folding chair over from against the wall and sat down beside me, close enough that her shoulder almost touched mine. "I sent it," she said, her voice low and dry. "Last night, to a reporter I know. Local investigative desk." She didn't say what it was. She didn't have to. The duplicate memory card was a cold, hard rectangle in the pocket of my cargo pants, a weight I kept checking for. "They have the files now," she went on. "The inspection histories. The repeated pump failures going back 20 years. The contractors who signed in and never signed out. The falsified drainage studies. The waste lines, sewer, industrial, residential, all converging on one grid square under Little Havana." She let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "The city's response came in at 7 this morning. They deny any biological chamber ever existed. They're calling the collapse the result of unstable, undocumented masonry, a historical anomaly." I took a sip of the coffee. It tasted like burnt paper. "And the footage?" "Corrupted," she said. "Officially. The visual record is too grainy, too full of static and shadow to prove anything clearly. But the audio..." She met my eyes. "The voices are clear, and the camera caught the badges. Don's badge, a few others. It's enough. It's triggered a state inquiry. They can't ignore missing persons." Outside, down in the street, I could hear the faint sound of voices raised. A gathering. Families, I realized. She saw me listening. "They started arriving an hour ago," she said. "Outside the department building, holding pictures, asking where their people are." I thought about Don's face under the membrane, his milky eyes finding mine, the way his lips had moved without sound. "Take the proof." "The inquiry will uncover the cover-up," Elena said. "The falsified reports, the missing workers, the illegal dumping. They might even charge people. But believing in paperwork fraud is not the same as believing the thing under the street was alive. They'll call it negligence, greed, a systemic failure to maintain infrastructure. They will never say its name." I understood then, the shape of what was coming. Proof of wrongdoing was a public record. Proof of the horror was a memory, a feeling in your bones when the warm wall spoke with a stolen voice. The first could be argued in a hearing room. The second was yours to carry alone. "They're suspending your license," she said. It wasn't a question. "Pending investigation. They'll say your unauthorized entry caused the collapse, the flooding. They've already drafted the statement." I just nodded. My shoulder throbbed in time with my heartbeat. The hearing was at 2 in the afternoon, in a county room on the 3rd floor that smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and old carpet. I sat at a long table, the surface scarred with coffee rings. My shoulder was stiff, and my left ear still had a wet, muffled quality to it, like I was listening from the bottom of a well. A lawyer for the county, a man in a suit that cost more than my truck, laid out the case. He cited my use of bolt cutters to sever a feeder cable. He mentioned the unapproved knife I'd carried, reckless conduct, deviation from contracted scope. He described my shoulder wound, the damage to my hearing, as the foreseeable consequences of my own decisions. Elena was there, at the other end of the table. They reassigned her while we sat there. An inland office, up near the lake country. A memo was slid across the table to her. She read it, her face blank, and set it down without a word. The lawyer warned her, his tone pleasant and final, not to discuss the Warner case. Any Warner. I didn't say much. They asked me questions, and I answered with yes or no or I don't recall. When they pushed about the chamber, about what I'd seen, I said the footage was on the card they'd taken. They called it contaminated material. Inadmissible. At the end, they offered me a settlement, a sum of money, in exchange for my signature and the surrender of any duplicate files. I looked at the number. It was enough to cover the truck payment for a year, maybe 2. I didn't sign it. I pushed the paper back across the table. The lawyer didn't seem surprised. He just collected the papers into his briefcase with a crisp, efficient snap of the latches. The reporter's story published online while we were in the hearing. I saw it on my phone in the elevator going down. It was thorough. It listed the failures, the missing names, the converging waistlines. Right beside it, taking up equal space, was the city's denial. A statement from the commissioner's office, calling the allegations baseless and the collapse a tragedy compounded by irresponsible speculation. I walked out of the county building into the afternoon sun. The heat felt good on my face after the air-conditioned chill of the hearing room. My truck was in the parking lot, a dusting of dried mud from the flood still on the fenders. I understood now, completely. The institution could admit to fraud. It could admit to negligence. It could even admit to losing people. But it could not acknowledge the organism, because to do that would be to acknowledge what it had been fed, and that was a ledger no hearing room could ever open. My burden was no longer just the memory, the thing I'd seen breathing in the dark. It was legal. It was financial. It was the bandage on my shoulder and the ringing in my ear. It was the unsigned paper in my pocket, and the duplicate card I still had. I got in the truck. The engine turned over, a familiar sound. I sat there for a minute, my hands on the wheel, looking at the building in the rearview mirror. Then I put it in gear and drove. 3 weeks later, I was renting an apartment above a cafe in Little Havana while my shoulder healed. It was a small place, one room with a kitchenette along the back wall and a bathroom that was mostly shower stall. The window looked out onto a narrow alley where the cafe put out its trash cans at night. I avoided storm drains, construction sites, and anywhere I caught the smell of wet pennies on the air. My days were quiet. I'd go for walks when the streets were dry, and I'd come back and sit at the small table by the window, working my shoulder through the stretches the physical therapist had given me. The pain was a constant, dull companion, a reminder that the bolt had torn through muscle and not bone. Late on the 23rd night, a light rain started. It wasn't a storm, just a soft, steady patter on the window glass and the fire escape outside. I was in bed, but I wasn't sleeping. My shoulder ached when I lay on my back, and the ringing in my left ear was worse in the quiet. That's when I heard the tapping. It was coming from the bathroom, a metallic sound, 3 quick knocks against metal, then a pause, then 3 more, like someone rapping a coin against a pipe. I got up and stood in the doorway listening. The sound was clear, coming from inside the drain of the small, rust-stained sink. The apartment was otherwise silent. I knelt down, my bad shoulder protesting, and put my ear closer to the drain. The tapping stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then a voice came up, wet and echoing as if spoken from the bottom of a well. It was my voice. It said, "Dale, open the door. I'm hurt." I sat back on the cold tile floor. My hands were steady. I'd heard my own stolen voice before, down in the dark. But hearing it here, in a rented apartment above a cafe, was different. It was a violation of a different kind. I went to the small desk by the window where I'd stacked the paperwork from the rental, the lease, the building rules, a faded floor plan the landlord had included. I spread the floor plan out under the lamp. It was a photocopy of an older blueprint, the lines blurry in places, I traced the plumbing lines with my finger. The sink drain tied into a main stack that ran down through the building's foundation. And there, marked in a dotted line that ran parallel to the property line, was a municipal feeder line. It was one of the smaller ones, a secondary conduit. I checked the date on the blueprint. 1982. The collapse hadn't reached everything. They'd poured concrete into the main chamber, sealed the central mound, but the network was older and wider than one cavity. Some of the feeder lines, the capillaries, were still there, still connected. My hand went to the pocket of my sweatpants, where the duplicate memory card was a hard, familiar rectangle. I gripped it through the fabric. They'd buried it. They hadn't destroyed it. Somewhere under the neighborhood, under the repaired streets and the reopened shops, something had learned my voice, and it was waiting for the next pump to fail, for the next rain to overwhelm the system, for the next contractor to be sent down with a clipboard and a limited scope. I didn't open the drain cover. I didn't call the water department. I just sat on the bathroom floor with my back against the tub and listened. The voice came again just before dawn. This time it wasn't mine. It was Don's, weak and waterlogged. Leroy. Then it was Dale's, calm and commanding. Leroy. Then it was mine again, a perfect imitation of the way I'd sounded in the tunnel, scared and trying not to show it. Leroy. It just repeated my name, cycling through the three of us, a broken record playing from under the city. Outside, the sky lightened from black to gray. I could hear the first delivery truck rumble down the alley, the crash of the cafe's metal gate being rolled up. The city had repaired Southwest 8th Street. They'd reopened the businesses, paid out some insurance claims. They'd even hired another contractor, some guy from out of county, to certify the next pump station as fully operational. Life had gone on. The official story was set in concrete, just like the chamber. My phone buzzed on the floor beside me. A message from Elena. No text, just a file attached. I opened it. It was a map, hand-drawn, showing 3 unexplained feeder lines still active beneath Little Havana. They were marked with dates, 1978, 1989, 2002. The lines converged on a grid square 2 blocks west of my apartment. She hadn't written a word. She didn't need to. I got up, my knees stiff. The ringing in my ear was a constant high-pitched whine, but underneath it, now that I was listening for it, I could feel something else. A low, steady vibration coming up through the floorboards. A pulse. It was so deep it was more a feeling in my bones than a sound. My hearing damage made ordinary silence ring, but it also tuned me to frequencies most people never noticed. I knew then what I was going to do. I couldn't expose the organism completely. The city would never admit it existed, and trying to prove it would just get me committed or buried under more lawsuits. But I couldn't ignore it either. I'd survived the inspection. I'd walked out. That meant I was responsible for the thing they refused to name. I made a pot of coffee and sat down at the table. I opened a new document on my laptop. I started with what I knew. Every drain location I'd passed on my walks, every valve cover I'd seen set into the sidewalk, every missing worker's name I could remember from the files and from the pods on the wall. Don Warner, others. I typed them out. I began sketching my own maps, cross-referencing Elena's file with the public utility records I could pull up online. It was slow work. My shoulder ached, and I had to stop every 20 minutes to stretch it. But I kept going. The apartment filled with the gray light of morning. The rain had stopped. Down in the alley, I could hear the cafe's espresso machine hiss. The smell of coffee and baking bread drifted up. I kept typing. I accepted it. This was my job now. To watch. To document. To remember the ones who hadn't walked out. To listen for the tapping in the pipes and the vibration under the floor. And to know, for as long as I lived here, what it meant. I saved the file. I titled it Watch. Then I sat back in the chair, the steam from my coffee cup curling up in the quiet room, and listened to the city wake up above something that was sleeping, but not dead.